Samini. And Representative Amore, I know that you want to have a statement, and you have a major proponent of your bill that I will allow you to introduce.
Thank you,
Representative Amore.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What my bill does is it creates a task force, a joint task force, to study the effects of the Common Core, to answer some key and pressing questions about the Common Core, to answer some questions in regard to the park examination. In my view, this type of task force should have been set up in 2009. Of course, that would have been impossible because the Common Core was not completed by 2009, and neither was the park exam. So what this does is it tries to answer those pressing questions, and you're going to hear through testimony what those pressing questions are. And they're not questions just in Rhode Island, they're questions all over the country. And we've seen New York and Kentucky move away from the park exam, and we've seen them pass legislation or at least move the Board of Regents to create a delay like Representative Dickinson was talking about. So this bill would delay the park testing and establish this task force that would ask these key questions that are identified in the bill. I was brought to this very simply, and I'll wrap it up here. I'm very familiar with the RIDE teacher evaluation model, being a RIDE teacher. And I'm very aware that it's the work of Charlotte Danielson that guides much of this evaluation. And when she was quoted as saying that she believed the park may be a train wreck, that got my attention. When I heard early learning experts, not just a few of them, but experts, 500 who signed on to the joint statement of early learning health education professionals on the Common Core, that said they were very concerned because they had grave concerns about the standards for young children. The proposed standards, they said, would conflict with compelling new research in cognitive science, neuroscience, child development, early child education. These are legitimate concerns and legitimate questions that are being asked all over the country. So what my bill would do is press the pause button, investigate these questions, find out what we're getting ourselves into, delay the use of the park. Everybody wants high standards. Everybody wants teacher quality. Everybody wants our students to be as prepared as they can for the workplace and for college. But to rush into something that's been unproven and untested makes no sense to me. At this point, I'd introduce Mr. Tad Siegel of Stop Common Core, Rhode Island, who will make a more comprehensive presentation on behalf of my bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
And Mr. Siegel, come right up front. We're ready. And then we'll hold the questions for the sponsors until Mr. Siegel has completed his statement. Welcome, Mr. Siegel.
And thank you, Representative Amore, for the opportunity to testify before you today. There's a long line of folks behind me to talk, and I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. You see, I have a keen grasp of the obvious. My background is that I am a Rhode Islander, grew up here. I'm largely the product of Rhode Island Public Schools. I went to Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary. I graduated from the University of Rhode Island with a degree in journalism, and I was an editor on the Good 5 Cent cigar. And I'm proud of all those things. My work took me into other places. It took me into Washington, D.C., where I started before that as a reporter, actually, in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then I went to D.C. and I served as a journalist there, including a stint with the McLaughlin Group. And if anybody has watched that program, you know why I have such little hair, because I pulled it all out when I was there. My concerns in the way, I also went and I worked on the Hill for U.S. Senator Alan Simpson. I worked for United Parcel Service in the Corporate Public Affairs Office, and then I started my own business. I have a small 7-person consulting firm. We focus on sustainability and environmental issues. I'm also the parent of 2 kids in public school in Rhode Island, one in kindergarten and one in 6th grade, and that's how I came to this position. Because we were dealing with the Common Core and its elements in real time in our household. And as I guess I never got rid of that reporter side of me, because when I started seeing what was happening in the household, I started digging deeper, and I started digging deeper, and I started digging deeper. And I didn't come to this with an agenda or a preconceived notion. I came to it out of some sense of frustration of what was happening to my kids. My kids are in Barrington, one of the best school systems in the country, and one of the top performers in high school graduation rates as it relates to where those kids are placed. So I started along with a lot of other folks in my community and elsewhere, the No Common Core Rhode Island.org, to start sharing information and to start this conversation. I do support Representative Amori's bill because I think it's a reasonable first step to take a look at some of the questions that we have that have not been answered in this process. I think that pausing the park makes a tremendous amount of sense given the fact that they're still building the plane while they're flying it. They're still developing the park test. And I took that test, actually. I took one of the segments of the test just last night, as a matter of fact. And one of the things that struck me was, in addition to how challenging it was a third grade question, was that you had to manipulate a lot of computer technology. You had to be able to drag and drop questions into places. So in part, the park is as much a test of computer capacity and ability as it is a subject matter test. Let me just say three things at the outset. First, I'm a supporter of high standards and great public schools. Second, I believe our teachers can and should be trusted to develop and deliver education based on their own high standards of what they expect from their students in their classroom every day. Third, we have a moral obligation, I believe, to create a better future for our kids, and that starts with the vulnerable populations that are among us, the ones who deal every day with poverty, the ones who are stressed by that situation. So the very first set of questions I would ask is, will the Common Core and high-stakes park testing improve our schools? Will it help our teachers teach? Will it help the most vulnerable students to achieve success in their lives? And in answering these questions, please show your work and explain how you arrived at that. I'm going to cover three things. How did we get here? Where exactly are we? And where do we go from here? Point one, how did we get here? Common Core state standards sounded great when they came out. Let me quote from a Common Core piece of literature that says, quote, "The standards will ensure that all students graduate from high school with the core academic knowledge and skills necessary for success in college, careers, and life for the benefit of their futures and the future of our nation." That sounds great. Rhode Island signed on to the core standards in 2010. Standards weren't formally released until about June 2010. You'll hear over and over again proponents of the Common Core saying that this was a state-led process, okay? That's a mantra. What's clear is that the process to develop the standards involved the National Governors Association, the NGA, the Chief State School Officers Association, the heads of the education departments of all the states in the country, and it was driven largely by a Race to the Top grant program that funneled millions and millions of dollars into the states. Didn't hurt that Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation also channeled some money. Some estimates put that at about $160 million. So, Gesundheit, I'd like you to think about the conditions that were happening when the Common Core was being adopted by the states. In terms of the economic situation, we were in one of the worst recessions that we've seen in generations in terms of the deficits that we were experiencing in the states, in terms of the unemployment rates that were going through the roof, and here in Rhode Island, one of the worst in the region. So that was the context under which this money was coming in from Race to the Top. Here's how Stan Karp, a veteran educator from New Jersey and an editor of Rethinking Schools magazine, puts it, quote, "The standards were drafted largely behind closed door by academics and assessment experts, many with ties to testing companies. Education Week blogger and science teacher Anthony Cody found that of the 25 individuals in the work groups charged with drafting the standards, 6 were associated with the test makers from the College Board, 5 with the test publishers at ACT, and 4 with Achieve. 0 teachers were in the work groups. The feedback groups had 35 participants, almost all of whom were university professors. Nothing wrong with that, but not classroom teachers, I interject. Almost all of whom, Cody found 1 classroom teacher involved in the entire process. According to early childhood expert Nancy Clareson-Page, in all there were 135 people on the review panels of the Common Core. Not a single one of them was a K-3 classroom teacher or early childhood professional. Parents were entirely missing. K-12 educators were mostly brought in after the fact to tweak and endorse the standards and lend legitimacy to the results." Here's how noted education historian Diane Ravitch described the origins of the Common Core. Quote, "I've come to the conclusion that the Common Core standards effort is fundamentally flawed by the process with which they have been foisted upon the nation." Common Core was adopted with signatures of only two people in most states, the governor and the Secretary of Education. Here it involved the Board of Education, Board of Regents at the time. That board met in, standards were released March 10th, 2010, and the comment period was over on April 2nd, one of them. On July 24th, the Board of Regents met and opened up comment period. On July 1st, they voted to adopt the, I've got my dates wrong there, apologies for that. The first week of the summer vacation, they voted to open it up, and then the following week they closed it. So let's contrast that with what Massachusetts did in 1993. In 1993, Massachusetts developed their standards with educator workshops, 10 well-publicized forums across the state to get citizen input. They held a 2-day televised forum at the State House to hear from businesses and government leaders, and they met with 10,000 people, produced 22-minute video, distributed 50,000 flyers. Their standards received 1,400 written responses. That's a process. What we did was a sham. Here's what Diane Ravitch says about where we are. This is nuts. Quote, "We have a national policy that is a theory based on an assumption grounded in hope, and it might be wrong, with disastrous consequences for real children and real teachers. Would a drug company about to release a major drug on the market that has major serious health consequences be allowed to do so without running a single trial, without doing double-blind tests, without making sure that that drug was both effective and safe? The answer is absolutely not. Yet here we are, foisting these standards and the PARCC testing on our kids without a single field test, without this having been tried in one classroom, in one county, in one state, anywhere in the country. That's remarkable." Here's what the Brookings Institution says about the standards. They say, "Despite all the money and effort devoted to developing the Common Core standards, not to mention the simmering controversy over their adoption in several states, the study foresees little to no impact on student learning. That conclusion is based on analyzing states' past experience with standards and examining several years of scores on the National Assessment of Education Progress." I'm going to make one last point. I'm going to talk a little bit about the developmental inappropriateness of the standards, because we're at our close, and I know you want to get to other comments.
Thank you.
I have a daughter. She's in kindergarten, as I mentioned. Her name is Kate.
My daughter's Kate, too. Please proceed.
Excellent. Meant you on a fine name. And for those with young children, you know that they're rather literal. Yet, in the math standards, in the Common Core, there are two components of those standards. One of them, quote, states, quote, "Students should reason abstractly and quantitatively." Second item in there, quote, "Students should construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others." I had to go back to my Psych 101 class, but the abstract reasoning skills of a 6-year-old are, let's just say, they're different from that of a 12-year-old. Piaget posited that you could test this by taking 2 beakers of water, and asking the student, are these 2 glasses of water the same in volume? A 6-year-old will say, yep, they are. Then you would take one of the glasses of water, and you would pour it into a different vessel. And you would put that in front of the 6-year-old. And you would ask the 6-year-old, which one of these glasses of water has more fluid, or do they both have the same fluid? And the 6-year-old normally will say, this one. That is the difference in how 6-year-olds think compared to 12 graders compared to 10th graders compared to 8th graders compared to 6th and 4th graders. Yet the standard writers never got that. Not a single developmental expert was on the panel that wrote the standards. We have standards and corresponding tests that are developmentally inappropriate, and we have no way of changing that because they're written in stone. So, in conclusion, there's an old saying in the business community: what gets measured gets managed. Okay? When it comes to PARCC testing, that's going to be inverted, and it's going to be what gets tested gets taught. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you,
Please state your name and proceed.
Good evening. My name is Robert Main, in favor of House Bill 7095. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. What started out when I wrote this as this afternoon, but is now well into this evening. I'm a veteran high school teacher of mathematics for 18 years at Chariho Regional School District and local president of the NEA Chariho, the Teachers Union. In my tenure, I've seen 3 different sets of standards: the new standards, the grade span expectations, and now the Common Core. I've seen 3 different sets of tests: new standards reference exam, the NECAP, and PARCC. Next year's juniors and seniors will have been instructed using 3 different sets of standards and assessed with 3 different sets of assessments through their entire schooling career. I've seen the implementation of No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, and ESEA reauthorization. There's always a new best thing somewhere on the horizon. As an educator, I adamantly feel standards are important and that they must be rigorous. Common Core standards are the newest indoctrination of the new next best thing. I believe this bill will help us to use this opportunity to make sure that we are implementing the Common Core correctly for the long term. This bill will allow a much-needed, thorough investigation of the standards and the means in which to assess student performance based on those standards. Throughout the state, I hear educators express their concern that they're not being listened to. Thankfully, the legislature last year took this into account and passed the bill to create the Rhode Island Teachers Advisory Committee, and I appreciate that. Parents have expressed that they too are not heard. What concerns me the most is listening to the students when they speak disparagingly of the fact that they feel that they are also not listened to. This is our golden opportunity to do so. Coming from a career and technical center where carpentry is a major program, I'm reminded of our 2 educators, Mr. Bannister and Mr. Bononi, as they say, measure twice, cut once. What I'm asking you to do is cut once and place common sense ahead of the Common Core.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Sutherland. I'm a Tiverton parent, and I'm a Massachusetts educator. I wanted to start by saying that the word waiver is driving me nuts tonight. Because it implies that a test is the only way to ascertain if a student is ready to graduate from high school, and that's just not the truth. There are so many other ways to do that. There are portfolios, there are senior projects, and the actual grades that students are receiving from the highly qualified teachers that we've hired to be in those classrooms to make those decisions. So when I hear people saying that the high-stakes test, it's not really high stakes. Yes, it is, because you're saying that they have to pass that. Or they could get one of these lesser things, this waiver, which will also allow them to do that. It shouldn't be that. We shouldn't be telling kids, well, the test is the real way to do it, but if you can't do it, okay, we'll slide you in a different way. And I think that's where people are coming up with this idea that if it's an alternate way to graduate from high school, that it's a lesser way, and that's just not true. What's failing in all this isn't just the fact that we're requiring students to pass a high-stakes test. What's also failing is that we've got this Common Core, which was designed by people who are not educators for the most part. A lot of people who are affiliated with testing companies were involved in that. Dr. Sandra Stotsky, I was able to listen to her. She's an English language arts expert, She was on the validation committee of Common Core, and she sent feedback to the standards writers when she saw that there were elements of Common Core that were just not appropriate. She was completely ignored by the standards writers, and when it was time for the Common Core to be validated, she refused to sign, as did 4 of the people on the validation committee. Regardless of that, it was still passed. So that alone tells me that we're not looking at standards that are created by people who have the best interests of children and educators in mind. The standards were pushed through and they were copyrighted, as was mentioned earlier, so you cannot make changes to them. You can add or delete 15%, but you cannot change the actual standards because they're copyrighted. Why anybody would choose to do that is beyond me. Last thing I would like to say is that I have a friend who was engaged to a woman that he thought was the perfect match. And as the wedding drew closer, he had second thoughts, and it turned out she wasn't the right match. But in having a heart-to-heart with him, he said, well, her family's already paid for the wedding. And so he went through and got married. 9 months later, they were divorced. So the argument about we've spent all this money, so we should just do it, doesn't fly with me. There's no use in throwing bad money after good money. Thank you.
Good analysis.
Interesting analogy. Welcome, Mr. Brown. Thank you for your patience this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. On behalf of the ACLU, I'm here to express our strong support for all the pieces of legislation that would delay high-stakes testing. You have written testimony from me. I just want to refer to one aspect of that testimony, and it's a chart that you'll see at the back, and it's a lovely color chart. It's a chart that RIDE itself prepared in the last couple of months, and it's their statewide progress toward attainment of RIDE performance measures and goals. And according to the color chart, RIDE has met 1 of its 33 goals in terms of progress on the NECAP. That is substantially below proficient. But nobody at RIDE is risking the loss of a diploma and the rest of their life. This, as far as I'm concerned, says it all. Don't throw the students under the bus because RIDE and schools haven't met the goals that have been set for them. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, we're going to rate your testimony as highly effective.